Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this month's Develop event, the latest in our Newcastle Develop series. This month's event is the hybrid working in the changing world of work. With our speaker, our lovely speaker who's helped us out before and is here again, Laura Evans. And now on to the topic of the discussion for this evening, which is how and where people work has changed significantly since the pandemic, and employees especially are seeking greater flexibility through hybrid working models. So hopefully this event this evening with Newcastle alumna Laura Evans will explore those different types of flexible and agile working and how they can be implemented for a truly hybrid workplace. Hopefully, as you can see, Laura graduated from Newcastle in 2005, has worked in operations, policy and human resources as part of the civil service, and has set up glass ceilings that has been running since 2020. And without further ado, I shall pass on to Laura to begin.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hopefully my screen is sharing there. It's great to be here. My name's Laura Evans, as Jeremy said. I joined the civil service after leaving Newcastle in 2005. I worked in operations and policy roles before moving into the HR profession. And seeing what was going on in the world of work, set up Glass Ceilings in 2020, which looks at making sure that all workplaces are inclusive and considering everybody from a variety of backgrounds and with varying needs in the workplace. Hugely passionate about the future of work and embracing new ways of working as we adapt. So yeah, really pleased to be here tonight. So looking at the future of work, this is something that is thrown around. You'll see it written everywhere. The future of work, what does that mean? Employee needs and business needs are all changing and very quickly. Not just because of the pandemic, the trends were there, but certainly since COVID and Brexit as well, has really accelerated the pace of change and what people want from the workplace and what people need. So we're moving now towards what's known as people-centred employment, adapting to those changing business and people needs, making the best of both worlds for everybody. Aligning organisational strategy to meet the external drivers and demands that are placed on businesses and on people as well when they're presenting in the workplace. Businesses and organisations need to be alert to trends, emerging trends, and then future-proof themselves. As we've seen, having to adapt rapidly has huge consequences. So being alert to future trends is really important. And inclusion and belonging. So we've moved away from just box ticking equality and diversity, although obviously that's still hugely important. But inclusion and belonging, so people bringing their whole selves to work, people thriving, therefore businesses and organisations are thriving because their people are. These are the main drivers in the workplace at the moment, just to set that context, and I'm sure you'll be aware of most, if not all of them, and be perhaps wrestling with them as well at the moment. So obviously we've mentioned the pandemic. It hasn't really gone away as much as people might wish that it had. There are issues such as long COVID, and of course these new ways of working to adapt to that. Post-Brexit has caused huge impact to the labour market, to the availability of workers in many sectors, and to supply chains as well, which is having that knock-on economic effect on businesses, and therefore looking at sort of workforce planning. So how and where we work in the context of hybrid working could help to alleviate certain pressures there. The other main ones really are around that sort of wider economic consequences, the cost of living and inflation. It can save people money to not have to travel to the office every day. And it can also save businesses money to rationalise their estates, to cut the overheads on estates as well. But there is a knock-on effect, of course, because of investing in technology, and also upskilling the workforce to be able to use that technology in an effective way. I mentioned inclusion and belonging. There's intersectionality, so how do we all work together? And as we'll discuss tonight, there are areas with hybrid working that don't suit everybody's circumstances. So how do we make sure that it is inclusive to everybody's needs as well as suiting business needs? And again, individuality, bringing your whole self to work. This is the golden thread. I use this quite a lot for various topics. In the context of how and where we work, this golden thread is about how leadership of these issues can really implement change and embed change in organisations. When with glass ceilings, when we talk about leadership, it's not just people in leadership positions. Obviously, the context is set at the top, but leadership should be at all levels throughout an organisation, because everybody should be able to voice their needs and to state their needs, and that does show leadership. So harnessing that leadership in these areas, because just because someone is in a more senior position doesn't mean that they know everything. They may not have the same lived experiences, but that leadership then should go through organisational strategy. So with regards to how people work, workforce planning, estate planning, and looking to implement hybrid and alternative working models. That then goes through the people strategy for the organisation, and that's looking at the impacts on people through then all of the people policies. And that then overall sets the culture of an organisation. So not all organisations can embrace fully at home working or even hybrid working. There will be some roles that can't. We'll go on to look at that. But setting that culture where at least people can state their needs and try to look into ways of working that suit them, that's really important. And that's that golden thread that should go through the organisation. So what is meant by hybrid working? Hybrid itself, I'm sure you've heard it. I did a Google search, other search engines are available, and just took a screenshot of what came up. So yeah, hybrid in sort of the biology sense is mixing two or more species together. I'm a massive Formula One fan, massive Ferrari fan. The turbo hybrid era, that's probably where I'd first heard the word hybrid in any sort of context, and that's what it evokes for me. Essentially, it's a noun. It's mixing two or more things together to make a whole. And so for hybrid working itself, mixing two or more ways of working together to create a new way of working that works for an organisation. ACAS, which is the body that looks after employment law and guidance in the UK, they describe it as a type of flexible working where an employee splits their time between the workplace and remote working. They say that working from home is the most common way of working remotely. It isn't always, it doesn't even have to be. We'll go on to discuss that a bit more. And an employee might work from home all of the time or as part of a hybrid working arrangement. So they've added that statement in. Do note, though, that even in this definition, and I'm not in any way criticising ACAS, I wouldn't do that, but I found it really interesting that this explanation that they use says where an employee splits their time between the workplace and remote working. Well, the workplace, if you are working from home, it is your workplace. So it's not just the estate, the traditional office. And as we will sort of discuss in more detail and look at tonight, that is something that's a real issue, is how people envision what is the workplace, and that sort of disconnect between that being their home or an alternative place than the office. So the business case for moving to hybrid and other sort of flexible working models is quite compelling, and it's one that companies should, try to think about. So attracting and retaining the best talent available. There are reports out that 1 in 5 employees plans to leave their current role, and one of the main factors for that is because they're not satisfied about their working arrangements. A major driver is, of course, pay, given everything, but one of the main factors is to do with where people are working and their working arrangements. So if you want to attract and retain the best talent, and if you as an individual want to make sure that you can thrive and hybrid working works for you, then there's a real business case there for organisations to consider. It's inclusive and it's a modern workplace culture because it's embracing just the modern way of working. It will bring different perspectives as well, because if people are working in a hybrid model, or there is a potential for more people to work from home, they don't necessarily have to be in the location of the organisation. So I, over the last 2 years, have worked with people all around England, Wales and Scotland, whilst being based in the northwest of England. Obviously, I'm a Newcastle graduate. I'm able to do this tonight from the northwest of England. I haven't had to travel to Newcastle as much as I love Newcastle, but I've been able to do a full working day. And people bring with them different perspectives. There are different challenges in different areas as well, and that really can make a really sort of interesting business and interaction between people that can really help with the productivity as well, and building new relationships, and it helps that overall inclusion piece also. There's improved health and well-being. There are studies around it. Obviously, there are well-being impacts as well to enforce working from home and where the environment isn't suitable. But equally, people not having to rush around, commuting, standing for long periods, standing up on trains or public transport. There is improved health and well-being to have a better work-life balance. It can increase productivity. I sat and worked out that I probably work between 3 and 4 hours extra a day in total. That's not the length of time of my working day necessarily. That's just the time not spent sitting on a train. And I was sometimes standing on a train, unable to actually, even check my emails because there wasn't room and it wasn't secure. Somebody could read over my shoulder. So that's 3 to 4 hours extra time a day that an organisation can get out of somebody potentially. And opportunities for growth as well arise, again, because you can increase your reach if you are operating a hybrid model. Just to give some context, and literally if I'd been doing this 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have had, it would have been different statistics, because it is changing all the time. And that comes back to that about being alert to trends and alert to things. It's important to be able to adapt. So as of May, the ONS has done a survey, and 24% of workers are now undertaking some form of hybrid working, and that's increased from 13% in February. 46% are travelling to their place of work on a daily basis, with 14% working from home every day, and that's down from 22% in February. So just 3 months, that's really come down. 78% of people who are working from home some of the time do report that they feel they have a better work-life balance. So that's over 3/4 just. 53% feel there are fewer distractions at home, and 52% say they complete work more quickly. 47% of employees and 60% of businesses have reported improved wellbeing, as we spoke about on the previous slide. And 43% of businesses have reported a reduced overheads, and 41% increased their productivity. But obviously, that does mean that 59% haven't increased productivity. So that's why it's about getting the right balance and doing this in the right way and well.
Can I just ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the home life balance, which is, do you think it might, I know people have said they've found increased work-life balance, but do you think there's a danger that we might end up sliding the other way, where people are saying, well, my workplace and my home place are now blurred, and so the expectation from employers is that I'm available all of the time, whereas set office work means like, well, I'll go to the office at 9 o'clock, I work till 5 o'clock, and then that's it. I can shut everything down and go home and I don't have to think about it. So do you think that might be a concern if we slide more for more people to be hybrid working?
Yes, it is a concern, and that's why I think there are people that can fully work from home, but the hybrid model or it's agile working, which we'll go on to, is really the way to look at it. So for those people, it actually might suit some people to go to their place of work every day or more days a week than not. If there are wellbeing concerns, it's really important as well for organisations who do have that duty of care to sort of risk assess that and make sure that people are doing reasonable hours each day, and it's not creeping into their work-life balance, because you're absolutely right, there is always a risk, as some people found during the full lockdowns. Hopefully we will never have to return to that again. So the keys to success, and this will touch on that, thanks Jeremy. So assessing roles for possible alternative working patterns. So leaders, HR people should look at all of the roles and impact assess all of the roles in their organisation for the potential for working. And really importantly, should involve employees and representatives as well, if it's a unionised workplace, in decisions on alternative working patterns. So to speak to people about what they need. To really make it work, and again, this speaks to Jeremy's question, training and upskilling employees on building interpersonal relationships remotely, and line managers and senior managers in remote leadership as well. So that is about checking on people's welfare, and also moving away from this having to see people to know what they're doing. It should be outcome-based performance objectives. You know if someone is achieving their work. Does it really matter how they're doing it, as long as it's to a good standard, an acceptable standard, and they are achieving their objectives and the business is achieving its objectives? Some people do work better in sort of short, sharp bursts and then a bit of rest and to come back to it. Some people are heads down all day on whatever they're doing. Some people work better later in the day. Some people work better earlier in the morning. That's definitely not me. It's horses for courses. So having that outcome-based focus rather than, presenteeism or having to see somebody, which can feel very intrusive anyway. Investing in technology and estates, which I did touch on earlier, infrastructures to support the hybrid working. There will be high costs involved with that at the outset. Even my own business, I'm spending on making sure that the IT is there. But in the long run, that sets up for success. Obviously, when money is tight, then there will be other constraints on that. But actually looking at where you can save money by having that IT and technological infrastructure in place, saving money on estates and on other things as well, could offset those costs potentially, depending obviously on the organisation itself. And again, as Jeremy quite rightly pointed out, protecting health, safety and well-being whilst working remotely. We're all responsible for that. And it should be an environment where we can feel able to voice our needs, and also if we do feel that we're working too long hours, or that extra commuting time is actually being spent working rather than on work-life balance things and the balance part, but that's very important too. So moving on then to what agile, flexible and hybrid working really is. So there is a statutory right to request flexible working in the UK. If you've had continuous employment with your employer for 26 weeks, employers must deal with requests in a reasonable manner, so they do have to take it seriously. They have to really seriously consider. It can be refused, but only if there's a good business reason, and increasingly, it is increasingly difficult actually to refuse someone a flexible working request in a reasonable manner. It's possible to agree a trial period, and actually some organisations might want to try this en masse with the consent of employees. They might want to look at different ways of working for a trial period and see if they work and what is the impact on productivity. Some companies, you might have heard, have gone to a 4-day working week, and it looks like those trials are going well for those particular organisations. Obviously that wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. And there must be a right of appeal. So otherwise, if there isn't a right of appeal, then it's likely that the organisation hasn't treated the request in a reasonable manner. There are different types of flexible working. Again, these are under a statutory footing, so making a statutory request. So it could be job sharing, 2 people sharing the same job and they split the hours between them. Working from home, which obviously is probably the most common one at the moment, and comes up already more tonight. Some or all of the job role can be delivered from home without travelling to a particular office base or a depot or whatever the organisation is, a factory. Part-time working, that's also a very common one, working less than the full-time equivalent hours for the role for that employer. That also increases employment opportunities for other people who work part-time. It's not quite the same as job sharing, of course, but that is possible. Compressed hours, that one is becoming more popular actually. So I've worked with lots of people who worked a 9-day fortnight, so they would have every other Friday or maybe every other Wednesday off every fortnight. Or some people compress their hours, their 5-day hours, into a 4-day working week, or perhaps drop a couple of hours a week, so they are part-time, but also compress them into 4 days as well, with only losing a couple of hours pay if they can afford it. There's lots of ways around that. It's quite a good way of not losing too much money by going fully part-time. Flexi time, this is often confused with flexible working, but that's where someone has a different start and finish time to what the perhaps contractual or the standard start and finish time. Not many organisations now do have a hard and fast 9 to 5 say. Some will have shifts within that, but a lot of organisations have sort of what's known as core hours. So that might be 7 till 7 as their flexi period, 7 till 7, and the core hours are everybody needs to be available for work if it's their working day between, say, 10 and 3:30. But either side of that, the start and finish time can flex, and that's a formal agreement with individuals. Annualised hours is very similar, but it's spread over the year, so it's on an annual basis, what it says on the tin. Staggered hours is slightly different to flexi time. That's where an employee has different start, finish and break times. So there might be flexi time within the organisation, and some people might have that. But if somebody's working staggered hours, then they have a very different time. And perhaps that might be somebody, I don't know who, is able to, that prefers to work in the evenings when normally that is outside of normal business hours. And phased retirement. So an important one to remember this, particularly with the ageing workforce as well. Set retirement age is being removed. People are working longer now, particularly women in their 60s, so WASPy women who are affected are having to work longer anyway. And it's great because people can work longer. So they don't just have to leave the workplace at a set age. But one way of preparing for retirement is, and also just acknowledging that some people, not all, it's not, no age discrimination, but some people may slow down as they get older. They might want to do that. They might want to do other things outside of work as well as they prepare for their retirement. And phased retirement has become quite popular within workplaces as well. So they're different types of flexible working. As I said earlier, employees can apply for completing 26 weeks of continuous employment with the same employer. That's a statutory application. Some employers may offer this as a day one right, and you might have heard of day one rights. There was meant to be an employment bill, or everyone expected there'd be an employment bill announced in the Queen's speech, and it wasn't announced recently. But one of the things that's expected in that bill, if and when it comes, is increased day one rights. So not having to work for a company for 26 weeks or more before you can ask for certain things. Many workplaces now, many quite progressive employers do offer these things from day one anyway, just as a matter of policy. And you can check any agreements, perhaps your organisation does offer that. It is only possible to make one statutory request per year. However, again, some companies may allow people to make more than one request. Again, that would be a matter of policy, but under the employment law, it's just one request per year. You can make an informal request, and that's always to be encouraged rather than having to formalise everything. But an employee should be advised of their right to make a statutory request if it's likely that will be declined. Just because having it on that basis means that it really does have to be looked into and declined on a very formal basis, and again can suggest a trial period. There are business reasons for rejecting a request, and probably noticed that a lot of these are the arguments that people throw out there for not having hybrid working or increased home working. So things like it's too costly and will damage the business. It's not possible to organise work that way, in a way that's still productive and profitable, that it won't be possible to recruit extra staff. Of course, that is a concern at the moment because budgets are very tight in the economic climate. Quality and performance being affected, that customer demands won't be met, or that there's just simply not enough work to do during the times requested, and that is a reasonable, there will be things that can't be done at certain times of the day. For example, if it's a front-facing role and the customers won't be ringing at that time, then that's just not a reasonable request to make. It's not possible. So that is flexible working. We talk about hybrid working, which is really a mix of home and a workplace or office-based approach. What I think people are really sort of moving towards now in this post-pandemic era, and I really like this term, is agile working. So agile working is complete flexibility over how people deliver their work and where they deliver their work from. Now, we will go on to sort of cover that there are some roles where that is simply not possible and obviously not possible. But there is an opportunity, again, to look at all roles and consider whether there can be more flexibility over this. What it requires, though, is a robust framework, good investment in the technology, as we've already said, and high levels of engagement and trust. So to prevent those sort of negative comments that we're hearing, and actually embracing it, and maybe just having the confidence, the trust, the engagement to try. And if it doesn't work, then, you know, look at that, but at least it's been tried. A great example of this, in February, Spotify announced their Work from Anywhere programme, and they open this up with work isn't somewhere you go, it's something you do. So that, as we were saying earlier, it's not between the workplace and home working. Work is something that you do, it's output based. It's the benefits that you get from it, it's the benefits that the organisation gets from the work. And in most cases, does it matter where that is delivered from, as long as it's being delivered? Spotify have had roles out recently that have had record numbers of people applying for them, so many applications, and it's thought to be because of this very agile, hybrid, flexible way of working. So as we've said, some roles cannot be performed from home. You know, you can't drive a HGV from your home. At the moment, the technology is not available. You can't treat somebody from your home. You can have a consultation in medical profession, but you can't actually perform an operation from home. That's not possible at this point in time. So of course there will be roles that can't be performed from home, but that's not to say that even in roles like that there aren't other ways of working that could be considered hybrid or flexible or agile. So someone could still be home based potentially in those roles, but they simply get changed in somewhere like a depot or a communal place, but their role itself is home based. And we have seen that actually, an example in the medical profession. There used to be more on-call rooms actually in hospitals, but now lots of the time a doctor on call is actually on call, but they're free to, you know, to be at home as long as they are available if they are called in. So that's an example where their base is technically, say, a hospital, but they could actually be based from home under their contract, as an example. Also, some people don't live in an environment. Sorry, it just it went too early. Some people don't live in an environment that is suitable for home working, and I would just show this clip now to demonstrate that.
Oh, please. Sorry.
So that just illustrates, obviously, not everybody is set up for working from home, but could the alternative place be somewhere else? Could there be a hub maybe that people can go to that is not necessarily, say the office is in another city and there are people who live in a particular area? Could the hub be closer to where people are located? And there are organisations that are actively thinking about this at the moment. Do remember that, you know, home working isn't for everyone. So do think broader than just the home being an alternative or hybrid workplace as well. The main thing that I would like to get across is do try to bring people with you. So everybody's heard about this note. I'm not criticising anybody. That's not my place to do that. But it's slightly passive aggressive and a little bit unnecessary to leave a note on a door. And as was pointed out, actually, if most people aren't even in the office and they're not really going to see this unless it's published in a national newspaper. So there's ways and means of engaging people. If it really won't work for an organisation, or it could work better, then that's fine. But talk to people, engage with them. We're all adults in the workplace and we should all be treated as adults. Equally, as I said right at the start, we can all be leaders of this in the workplace. We should all have a voice and we should all be given the opportunity to state our needs and to make this work for ourselves and for the benefits of the organisation as well. Moving on to reasonable adjustments, employers have a responsibility to make reasonable adjustments for people who have disabilities and long-term health conditions if they need adaptations to be able to carry out their role. So flexible, hybrid and agile working could be a reasonable adjustment for some people and has been over many years now. This is where glass ceilings is one of the reasons I set up glass ceilings, because it's making sure that anything that's brought in relation to working practices is inclusive to all and doesn't unfairly treat people. So just to talk through that, direct discrimination, that's where you treat someone who has a protected characteristic less fairly than someone who doesn't have that. So by not actually speaking to people or considering the needs of people in bringing in hybrid working or alternative working models, it could directly discriminate against people who have underlying conditions, disabilities, or other needs as well. Indirect discrimination is where it's something that's in the policy, a procedure or a practice. So again, that could be caused by not impact assessing a particular way of working. And a good example of that is if you only looked at hybrid working as the home or the office, if the home environment is not actually the best place for somebody, you are indirectly discriminating against them because of their home circumstances and potentially indirectly discriminating against them because they do not have as much choice as other members of staff. Discrimination by perception is where you believe someone has a protected characteristic and then you treat them less favourably. So that might be where someone who perhaps was in a vulnerable category during the pandemic and you just assume their needs, but they might not necessarily have those needs outside of the pandemic. They might not actually consider themselves disabled or have the same needs outside of the pandemic, and you haven't asked them what they need or what works best for them. And that's just by perception. And discrimination by association is where they're associated with someone who has a protected characteristic. A lot of the time this can happen with people who are carers or parents in the workplace. So if your hybrid or alternative working models, agile working models, doesn't work for people with caring responsibilities, do be aware that that could be discrimination by association, or if indeed you're in that situation yourself. Harassment is unwanted behaviour. It can be intentional, so therefore by design, or the effect, so not intended at all, but has these unintended consequences of violating someone's dignity or creating a hostile environment. And there is a risk of that at the moment. So where there is any shaming actually over home working, if someone is continuing to work from home because they have ongoing needs, if there's any sort of culture of shaming or implying that they don't work as hard because of that, and they have underlying needs where they need to continue doing that, then that could be considered harassment. So again, it's about talking to people and understanding what they need, not making assumptions. And victimization is if you then take action because they've made a complaint of either of the other two. So in summary, please take from tonight, and I hope it's been helpful, to consider all roles, consider your own role, and if you are a manager, consider all roles within your teams, within your organisations, and how they could be or might be delivered flexibly, looking to the future. Consider people and involve them in the decision making, don't just make assumptions. Obviously, consider the business needs and the impacts on the productivity, profitability, but also on the engagement as well. Because if you don't engage people in change, that affects them, especially where it's as important as how and where they work. Then they become disengaged. They can increase sickness absence. It can increase people wanting to leave. It can increase attrition itself, so people do resign because they're not happy. Again, 1 in 5 employees has said that they may resign within the next few months from their roles, and that then has that knock-on effect over productivity and profitability. So it is a balancing act, and always be inclusive about it. So consider the impacts on all people so that people can bring their whole selves to work wherever that place of work is. Thank you.
Great, Laura, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I think it's really timely to have this conversation. I think the discussion around what the future of work looks like and what the office looks like is going to continue for a significant period of time. So I think these sort of conversations and these sort of questions are really helpful. I think it's really useful to specifically highlight that it's actually your statutory right to apply for flexible working. It's not just a company policy. Now, the company has the right to turn you down, but it's not just my company doesn't offer it, so I'm stuck. There are some questions. I guarantee we won't get through all of them. So I'll just sort of cherry pick a couple that have come through, and we'll see how far we get. So somebody's asked, how can you ensure uniformity is the word they use, but I guess equality in the upcoming human resource challenges, especially perception. If you see somebody else like, well, they get to work from home all the time, and why can't I do that? Do you think there's a particular way that individuals or businesses could handle that, or is it just a case-by-case basis?
That's a really, really good and insightful question. Again, I think that comes back to engaging with people from the start. If you've spoken to everybody, if you've consulted with a small C, it doesn't have to be a big C, consult and engage people in their needs. Obviously, you can't reveal someone else's status. They may be open about it, but it's not possible for a company to do that, and certainly not HR. They shouldn't be doing that. But if you have engaged with people from the start, if you've really brought them on that journey with you, then there should be what should be built through that is this tacit understanding by everybody that this is our culture here. We work differently here. Some people will work from home, some people won't. Some people work some of the time from home, some people will work some of the time from the office. And it's what suits the individual, and we've ensured that is in line with company needs, and therefore equally the person who's sitting there and thinking, well, that person gets to do that, they've had a choice, they've had a say in how they work. Of course, there are roles where it is not possible. They need to consider, is that the role that they want to stay in? Do they want to work flexibly? Do they want to move into a role or somewhere else, even dare say, that can offer them a different way of working? But that's on them. It's not on other people to explain themselves in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you actually answered another question, which was, how much of a priority do you think hybrid working is going to be when you come to a new industry? But I think that's the point you just made, which is you have to decide how important it is to you. And if you're in an industry or a job or a company that doesn't give you what you need, if that's important enough to you, then you need to think seriously about moving. So actually, I think we answered that one. A question that actually came out of that sort of uniformity and was linked back to sort of the presenteeism that you mentioned before was, do you think there's going to be a challenge for companies to move away from contracted hours? So most, even permanent roles, it's a 35-hour week or a 40-hour week or whatever it is. Almost all contracts even now have that written in somewhere that you're supposed to work a nominal whatever it is. And obviously there are ways of tracking that with key trackers and logging people in. But actually, do you think that companies and HR and everywhere else should maybe start to think about, well, how do we replace the 35-hour week standard to make it more relevant for people who might be full remote working or hybrid working, where you can't necessarily have your finger on that pulse of well, you've only done 30 hours this week, so.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a huge piece there around what in HR speak is called strategic workforce planning, but which is essentially that. So pay should go with a job role. So there should be a level of pay that goes with a job role. That would solve lots of issues around who gets paid what, pay inequalities on any, not just gender, but all sorts of factors. So that's the rate of pay for the role. And then there are however many hours a week are needed to deliver that role. And it can that be done, as you say, more flexibly? So does it have to be between 9 to 5? And lots of places have changed that over the years. Lots of places have those core hours and alternative working patterns. And I think that there's something to be said for actually looking at those the principles that are set out for flexible working and actually saying, can we apply this across the board? And really assess all of our roles for this. And it's actually quite common when if you really think about it, things like shift working have been doing this for years. In manufacturing, in all sorts of industries over time, since the Industrial Revolution, really, people have done shift work, and there's been set hours that they can work for health and safety reasons and set hours that they need to be in the office. A lot of factory workers used to close down completely for 2 weeks at the end of December each year and into the new year, and that was just accepted. So these are not actually new things. It's just, for whatever reason, presenteeism has become a real issue, probably in the last 40, 50 years or so, where people don't consider how and where they work until we had the pandemic, and it really forced that into the forefront of people's minds again.
Yeah, and I know, and I'm sure we all have those anecdotes of friends who say, oh, well, my boss wants to be in the office, so we all have to be in the office because, if we're not there and he's there or she's there, then I'm seen to not be doing any work. So that idea of you're only doing work when you're in the office is clearly one that it has a real drive. And again, I don't want to particularly pigeonhole or denigrate a particular group, but it is those people that tend to have done most of their career like that. And it's quite a hard mold to break when you're like, well, I've spent 25 years clocking in at 9 and finishing at 5 and being told I have to be at my desk 35 hours. And now you're telling me that you don't want to do that and that you just have to trust me that I'm doing my work at home. I appreciate that that's difficult, and that's a tough conversation to have. And that does involve leadership from even higher up in the company to say, here's the training that you need, here's how you need to rethink those work approaches. So I completely agree with that. Two questions that came up and came to mind towards the end of what you were talking about around reasonable adjustment and harassment, actually, which I know are sensitive topics and we might not have time to get into them. But I guess one of the questions that comes up is there ever a limit to reasonable adjustment, either with flexible working or anything else? Because reasonable obviously indicates that at some point there is a place beyond which whatever somebody's requesting is unreasonable, and is it on the company to make those clear, so that if you're going in saying, well, I want to do full remote working, and you working events management, and like, we have to be on site to do the event itself, and like, well, I live in Sweden, so no, is there a limit, and should people be aware of those before they make those kind of requests to reasonable adjustments?
There is it's on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
So there isn't a hard and fast. If it's on a cost basis, if a company, say it's a very, very small business, and it would kind of put a business out of business to make a huge amount of adjustments, then that could be considered reasonable. But there are things like access to work exists, so you apply for funding for certain adaptations. If someone really cannot do a role, and all possible permutations of adjustment have at least been tried and considered,
sure,
then and it's still not possible for someone to do their role, or they get more sick, perhaps even because of the work activity itself, then there's your limit, because there are physically no more reasonable adjustments that could be made to keep that person in that particular role. But one reasonable adjustment can be to move somebody to another role in the same organisation,
sure,
and that they can do and doesn't have the same barriers. Yeah. So there should always be some sort of option for people. Sure. Yeah.
There's a question that I don't want to answer, but there's a whole separate conversation that to be had around when you think people might not be fit for a role because of illness or stress or something, and it's like, well, at what point do you have to move them somewhere else? But I don't want to get into that because it's a very separate set of conversations. Christopher, who's attending, has put up a question, which is, most people in larger organizations work in teams. Working from home during the pandemic worked well because those teams knew each other quite well. A lot of time businesses had a hiring freeze, so you weren't adding new people in. So how do we approach that sort of team cohesiveness, the sort of spontaneous social engagements that you get, especially when you're a new person in an office or a younger person in an office, that generates that cohesiveness in a team, warmth, feeling in a team, even loyalty towards a particular place, if so many people work away from a common workplace, or if the office maybe ceases to exist entirely? How do you think that people maybe tackle that?
Well, I think that we live in an online age, and actually the generations that are entering the workforce now and have been really over the last decade, they've grown up online. So are used to interacting, making friends, meeting like-minded people in an online environment. So I guess it's just making sure that when something is organised, there is a hybrid approach to it. So can people join on a Zoom call like this? You can do Zoom quizzes, you can organise things in a way that is, as we all did have to do during lockdown, even just to socialise with our friends. So it's just about making sure that if that is the way that the team is, or any events, don't plan them in that old-fashioned way, really, of let's all get in the same room. Let's ensure that people can join remotely, and make it some sort of online event. I'm really interested in this whole sort of metaverse and this is it augmented reality?
Yeah,
that can create a space for work socialization as well as work meetings as well. I'm really interested to hear more about how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think entirely anecdotally from our experience at work is that in order to replicate that kind of I really don't think that you can replicate that sort of spontaneity of, finishing work at 4:30 on a Friday and like, do you want to go for a drink? Because that, unless you work in an office where everybody works on the same day, those days may just no longer be around. So what you find is that although the spontaneity bit has gone, you put more effort into the structured stuff, and you put more effort into the diversity of structured stuff. So you find that people are willing to say, okay, well, let's try and arrange something the last Friday of every month, or the second Wednesday of every month. And we won't always do a go for dinner, go for a drink, meet up in person. We'll do one event in person, one event entirely online, try and find something we can do as a combination. And so from personal experience, that spontaneity is much harder to get because there's just not the number of people in an office. But it has been replaced with people the people that want to make the greater effort tend to make the effort to meet up with workplace colleagues more regularly, weirdly. So I do think it's something that people just have to be aware of, that actually, weirdly, you have to work harder at being social when you're more of a hybrid sort of combination.
Yeah, conscious of time, but very quickly on that, it wasn't a utopia before. So the spontaneity of going out, there are people that don't drink alcohol in the workplace. There are people who have responsibilities that can't socialise after work. And that's been the case for years, and they've been excluded for years from this type of practice. So actually, I think it should help with inclusion, that we are all, this is what should have been happening anyway, considering people who were excluded anyway.
True. I think there was a stat that it said like something like 1 in 4 like 18 to 21 year olds now are teetotal at universities, which is a shockingly, for people who went to university, this is the era that I did, having that many people who don't drink at university is a big thing. But you're right, lots of people don't, and to exclude them because you can't go to the pub after work is something that should have been changed a long time ago. You're right. I'm very conscious of time. We have blown through that hour. I'm really not quite sure. Every time we do these, I don't quite know where the hour goes, because I feel like we've only just sort of started to hit our stride, and we could spend quite a lot more time talking about this stuff. But unfortunately, you only have an hour, and people have dinner to make and stuff to get onto. So, Laura, thank you so much. Thank you for giving up your time. Thank you for giving us your expertise and your knowledge around this. I found it really useful, really insightful. There's definitely stuff that even I'm sure we can take away for our work. I really hope that the people who've attended have found the same. Don't forget, we've got one more develop session this academic year, which is next month. It is focused on the pitfalls and positives of first-time management. So if you're a first-time manager or thinking about going into management for the first time, that session should be helpful for you. And all this stuff to say is a final thank you to our attendees who gave up their evening. A thank you to Laura for presenting for the hour. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening, everybody. Have a lovely night, and we'll hopefully see you soon.